Good. So hi, Xiao. So you can start whenever you're ready.
Oh, sure. So let me just make, okay. Yeah, so hello, everyone. Thanks for having me here to present at this NLP seminar. It's my great pleasure. I think I did it once last year. I really like it. So this year, when Edward mentioned to me, so I'm very happy to join you again and sharing with you some of our research. So today, I'm going to present one of our recent work about neural keyphrase generation. This is a joint work with our former intern Wasi Ahmed from UCLA. So I will first present you what's a keyphrase generation and why it's an important problem for us. And then I will formulate the problem and also present you our solution. And then we'll present some experimental results for our solution. So for keyphrase generation, I guess everybody in the audience should be familiar with scientific papers. So you might have noticed that for many of the papers, there's always, not always, but many of the times, there's a section called keywords that contains a number of keywords that are very relevant to the content of the article and also give a good summary of the paper, what's it about. So the task of keyphrase generation is basically using a machine learning model to automatically generate such keywords given the document. So it could be a scientific paper, or it could also be a web page. Given this web page, we could also generate the representative keywords from its title or the body. So basically, this is a problem of generating keywords out of text input. So you may wonder why such problem is important. Actually, there are many real-world application scenarios for it. So the very first is scientific document retrieval. So we know that usually when authors, we provide keywords to our paper, these keywords are used for a search engine to index our paper so that other authors can find them easily. But in practice, not all the papers have this keyword section. Many of them, they don't have it. And even if authors provided keywords for their papers, they may not be always consistent, especially when the users, they are trying to use the same word across different domains. So that makes the retrieval difficult. So if there's an automatic approach that can generate keywords just given the paper itself, then it will be much easier for the indexing and retrieval. There's actually a recent work made by Putin et al. In 2020. They show that if they apply algorithm to generate keywords from the paper and append these keywords to the original paper's abstract and title, it will significantly improve the retrieval accuracy. So that's very beneficial for scientific document retrieval. Actually, there's also related work that's for the web domain. People are doing similar kind of work to generate keywords and append them to document. And that's very helpful for kind of a QA question answering system. So apart from this retrieval system, there's another very interesting application scenario, which we call contextual advertising. So if we look at this page on the example on the left, on the right, there's a page about coronavirus. So there's an ad slot on the page. So there will be many different ways to show an ad on the page. It could be based on the user's location, the gender, or based on the user's historical interest, for example, what you searched yesterday. But with contextual advertising, we're thinking that if we can show an ad that's better aligned with the content of the page, it will better reflect the user's intent at the particular moment. So it's likely to drive a better conversion metrics for the advertiser. So that's why it motivates us to understand this keyphrase generation problem, because if we can generate some relevant keywords out of the page content, then these keywords can be directly used to match to the advertiser's ads. So that's why we find this an important problem. So to summarize, the key phrase generation problem is basically to use a machine learning algorithm to generate a list of key phrases out of a text document so that the key phrase, they can summarize the main content being discussed in the document. So in our particular work, we are focusing on two types of text documents. One is scientific papers with its title and abstract, and the other will be web page based on the body and the title. So here, before going into detail, I want to give you a notation that we use in this work. So we can call a key phrase a present key phrase or absent key phrase. When we call it a present, it basically means that the keywords exist in the document, input document, as a contiguous text span. And when we say it's absent, it means that in the text, you cannot find it, but it's semantically related to the content. So it can still be a very good one when using it for retrieval or for matching the ads. So there have been a number of research dealing with this key phrase generation problems in the past. The early approach are mostly called extractive approach. So the basic idea is to extract a number of key phrase, present key phrase from the document. So the general approach people are taking is to first identify a number of important text spans from the document. They are usually name entities or noun phrases. And once having these candidates, we'll use a ranking model to measure the relevance between the keyword and the document. And then the key phrase that have a high relevance score will be considered as a key phrase for a given document. So this approach is very standard and has been widely used in the industry. But it also has a problem that by definition, it's not able to generate any absent key phrase. If we look at these data sets that we are using for our study, we are considering 7 different data sets. The first 5 are from the scientific domain for the research articles, and the last 2 are from the web domain. We can see that for this section, we can see, regardless where the document is from, in the ground truth keywords, the maximum number of present key phrase is like 73.6%. And if we look at the web domain, it could be even as low as 37%. That means there's a lot of absent key phrase, even they are not exactly as what's being written in the text. They can provide a very good summary to the content and might be very useful for matching task in the downstream. And another problem with this kind of extractive approach is, of course, the ranking model itself is usually based on a lot of human handcrafted features, and it requires a lot of feature engineering work. So following this and later with the prevalence of the neural networks, people start studying generative approach that actually using a language model to extract the key phrases. The most common approach is to use the so-called sequence-to-sequence model to do this job. And basically, the idea of sequence-to-sequence model is to simulate the way that humans are assigning keywords to a document. Basically, the model, it will try to read the entire document at once, understand the content and the context information, and then try to come up with a number of key phrases. So the model is basically try to simulate this process. The very first sequence-to-sequence model for key phrase generation was invented by Meng et al. In 2017. And the model is very familiar, it's called copy RNN. It basically uses an RNN-based network to encode the input sequence and try to generate the key phrase one by one. So with this approach, they consider each ground truth key phrase as an independent key phrase. So they generate one key phrase at once using beam search. And one novelty, I think, in this work is also introduce a mechanism called copy that use attention between the generated keywords and the input keywords to make sure that even if some words are out of vocabulary, they can still be generated in the output. And that seems to be very helpful for boosting the performance. And then later in 2020, Yuan et al. Proposed another approach called cat-seq. And this approach is very similar to copy RNN. And the major difference, so they basically use the same architecture. The only difference is that instead of generating this key phrase one by one, they are claiming that it's better to consider all the ground truth key phrase as a single sentence. So they concatenate all these keywords together as a sentence with some special character to separate them. And the main claim or advantage of this is that this approach doesn't require the model to know a predefined number of keywords to generate, because in real world, some documents are short, some are long, and the sentence used to describe the content are different. So it's not always true that each sentence can each document can have 5 or 10 relevant keywords. So using this single sentence or single concatenated sequence, it will give the flexibility for the model to generate as many as key phrases that are appropriate. And also this approach will allow more diversity among the key phrase, because each time when attention or a keyword is generated, it will also take into account that the keywords or the words that have been previously generated. So when all the keywords are taken together into a single sentence, it kind of the later word will try to avoid the previous word to allow more diversity. So that's compared to the previous copy RNN words, that's a good advancement. So in our work, we will kind of following this philosophy and try to do this 1-to-6 type of generation. So also with this kind of abstract generative approach, there are still some problems that are remaining. So first one is actually this kind of approach is not designed to read a very long document. It's because we know that with RNN, it's very expensive processing. And also when the sequence gets long, all this gradients has problem to propagate to the beginning. So it's kind of hard to learn the full context in the document. If we look at the data set we have, actually for the scientific document, since we're only considering abstract and title, so usually they're not very long, around 200 words. But if you look at the web documents, the web page, they could have even more than 700 words on average. So that's clearly too much for an RNN-based network. And also this kind of generation approach, they are good for generation, but they are not very good at generating present key phrase. So that's why in the work of copy RNN, they also propose to use this copy mechanism to kind of better deal with the present key phrase. And they actually show that without copy, the performance of RNN on its own could be very, very poor when generating this absent key phrase, the present key phrase, sorry. And also a problem with the copy is that even the word can be copied from the source to the target, it might change the meaning of the word because the full context might get lost in this process. So that's a remaining problem that needs to be solved with this kind of sequence-based sequence-to-sequence approach. So with our work, we proposed a new neural key phrase generation models. So basically to deal with these two problems, we actually propose a two-step approach. So the first step, we say, okay, the document is long. How can we understand it better? So we propose to first use a model to select the most important sentence out of the document. So when we generate the keywords, instead of using the entire document, we can only focus on the top K important sentence. And then once we come to the key phrase generation, we only focus on the selected important sentences. And here we say that, okay, we want to leverage both the advantage of both extractive and abstractive algorithms. So we are building a single model that can extract present key phrase and in the meantime generate absent key phrase from the selected sentence. And we'll show that it's actually will result in a much better performance than using only one of them. So for salient sentence selection, here we define a sentence as salient or important by comparing the sentence with the ground truth key phrase. And we say that a sentence is salient if it contains a ground truth present key phrase, or the sentence, it doesn't contain any present key phrase, but it overlaps with an absent key phrase. And then the sentence selection problem is simply a binary classifier that's try to predict for each sentence in the document whether it's a salient sentence or not. So in our work, we actually plan to use a transformer-based model. So I don't know, I hope that you are familiar with this transformer-based model as it's kind of very popular these days. So just a brief high-level introduction. It's just taking an input, going through an embedding layer to create an input embedding. And then there will be a number of self-attention blocks. It will start with multi-head self-attention and then followed by this feed-forward network. These are considered as a self-attention layer. Then the transformer model is just a stack of multiple layers to produce an embedding for the input. And its model has been shown to achieve the best results for many NLP tasks. So our sentence selector is actually based on transformer. So in this figure, it have a very high level overview of the algorithm. So each term, each token here, it's not a token, we actually consider as a word embedding that's converted from an embedding layer that we'll present later. So each word in the input document will have such an embedding. And then we feed the embedding into our transformer-based encoder. And then the encoder will produce one embedding for each word. Then we will apply a max pooling and min pooling at the sentence level to get an embedding and concatenate them. Then that will give us an embedding for the entire sentence. Then we will feed the sentence embedding into a binary classifier, which is a max out network, to produce a 0-1 label for the input sentence. And from this step, we will know what are the important sentences for the later key phrase generation task. So as an embedding layer, we are actually apply some mapping from the one-hot encoding of the word position to the fixed dimensional word vectors. So here we are using absolute position in addition word, and then also the segment ID. It means where the word, which sentence the word will appear. And for the character embedding, we're actually relying on CNN model to produce the embedding in the same dimension. And then once we get the 4 embeddings, we will do an element-wise addition to merge them together to represent each word in the input text. And then they will be fed into the transform model. So as the learning objective, since we are doing a binary classifier, so we are just using this weighted cross entropy loss. The rest are the standard. Just here, we are introducing this new term W, which is a hyper parameter to weight the importance of positive and negative samples. So now let's look at the extractor and generator, which actually does a job of key phrase generation. So I want to first explain this through an example. So for key phrase generation, we also formulate as a binary classification problem. So we feed the model with a selected sentence as a sequence of words, and then we try to predict for each word a binary label to see if it's part of a present key phrase. So for example, given the web page we see in the very beginning, we have selected 3 important sentences. They are concatenated together using this special token, meaning end of sequence, not the end of sentence. And then here we have this word in red and the word in blue. They are the present key phrase for this example. Then all the extractor does is to predict a 0-1 label for each of this word in the input text. And then once we have this sequence, we will do some post-processing and see, okay, there are 2 ones, they correspond to the word in the original document, coronavirus vaccine. And then since they appear together, we consider them together as a key phrase. So we will have 2 key phrases out of this example. And then for absent key phrase generation, we actually does it as a language model to generate a key phrase in a sequence to sequence fashion. So again, for the same input text, we will have these words labeled in red that are kind of correlated overlaps with our absent key phrase. And then the generator will generate 1 long sequence that may contain multiple key phrases. And this is because we mentioned that we want to follow this 1-to-6 schema to generate all these key phrases at once. And then once we have this generated sequence, we again do some post-processing to split them into different absent key phrases. So this is a high-level architecture of our extractor generator. So again, here is our input. Now it becomes our salient sentences that's being selected in the first step. And each symbol here, it also means an input embedding. So the embedding is first fed into a transformer-based encoder to produce 1 embedding for each of these input tokens. And then we will apply a simulated extractor will be a multi-layer perceptron to make a binary classification if each of these input words is part of a present key phrase. And from there, we could do the post-processing. And then we also have this generator, which we use actually a decoder to generate the key phrase. So the generator, it will share the same encoder as the extractor. And then in addition, it will also take the output, which means the the words that have been generated so far at each step for the decoder. And then it will generate 1 embedding, 1 hidden representation for at each timestamp. And then we will apply a softmax function on this output to obtain a distribution over the vocabulary. And then if it's a traditional generation approach, we will just say, oh, what's the word that have the highest probability in the vocabulary? Then that will be the word we generate at this step. But with our work, we also introduce a new mechanism called informed copy. Basically, we're going to look back the present key phrase that have been generated and say, okay, if a word has been part of a present key phrase, then we want to avoid it and not to generate it from for the absent key phrase. So we will block them in this distribution. And then finally, by merging them two, we will get a final distribution for the absent key phrase. So here's a little more detail about the extractor and the decoder for the generator. So the extractor, as we said, is basically a multi-layer perception. So here this OGL is basically means the hidden representation out of the transformer encoder. And then we just go through the fully connected layer and finally apply a sigmoid function to convert it into a probability. And then for the generator, as we said here, this HTL is a hidden representation out of the transformer-based decoder. And then we just apply the softmax function for it to predict what's going to be the word at this step. Now, actually, yeah, in this work, we also proposed a new attention mechanism that we call the layer-wise coverage attention. So the whole idea here is that once we have a very long document, we want to kind of guide the algorithm to focus or pay attention to the entire document, but not only generating the keywords from the beginning or a particular part of the document. So basically, what we did is that we let the model to decay the attention weight for the input tokens that have been already taken into account. So if we look at this formula here, this ETI prime is basically the attention weight at each step. So T means the words that's going to be generated at step T, and I is the input token I. So when T equals to 1, then this is just the regular attention weight, which is a scaled dotted product between the keywords to be generated and the input token. And then once we go further for the next, second, third, and the later steps, we will discount this original dot product by this value. And this value is basically measuring the similarity between the current actually the previous K, because K equals to 1 minus T minus 1, basically the previously generated tokens, to measure the relevance between this guy and the current input token. So the more they are similar, and the more the higher this value will be, and the more the attention weight will be discounted. Basically, it says that if this current input token is very similar to what has been generated, then let's don't give it a lot of weights, so that it becomes less likely to be generated in the current step. And in this way, the model will try to read the entire sentence, entire document, and try to cover different aspects of it. And then here is a little more introduction about the informed copy mechanism that we just mentioned. So the overall idea is that once a word is already part of a present key phrase, then we don't want to copy the word to let it be a generated absent key phrase. Because we have this observation is that once we generated a word, it might change its meaning. It may not be as good as having it in a present key phrase. So this formula basically gives a probability of generating a keyword at a given step T. And this is basically a sum, a weighted sum of the probability of generating this word if we don't use copy mechanism, or if we use this copy mechanism and generate this word. So as a probability of generating a word using the copy mechanism, we basically apply the attention weight between the keyword that's going to be generated at this step and the input token I. And so you see this is an attention weight computation. It's the output from the embedding layer for the token I, and also the hidden representation for the decoder output. And then once we have this attention weight, we can compute a so-called context vector, which is a weighted sum of the embedding layer output. And then we concatenate this context vector with the hidden layer output from the decoder, and then applying this sigmoid function to compute the probability of using copy. So this is a standard representation for the copy mechanism. But with our informed copy, what we did is that once we detect the word is already part of a present key phrase, and then we simply set this term to be 1 and this term to be 0, so that we make sure we don't copy this term, but only consider the generation probability from this word. So as a learning objective, since our model has two modules, one is for the extractor, the other for generator. So the loss is a weighted average of both losses. And for the extractor loss, as it's a binary classification, so we have this weighted cross entropy loss as we used previously, but just the weight might be different depending on this task. And then for the keyword generation, we are just using this standard negative loglit likelihood of the ground truth key phrase by multiplying this the log probability at each step, and finally compute this negative loglit likelihood. Yeah, so I don't know if the algorithm part is clear. If you have any question before we move to the experiment section.
Any questions for the speaker? I want to take this moment to get any questions from the audience.
Can you go back to the generators architecture? Yeah.
This one. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm wondering what do we fit into the decoder and output with the present phrases. Yeah.
Oh, so basically from the decoder output, we said that we apply a softmax function on the hidden representation. So it will come up with a probability distribution over the entire vocabulary. So each word will have some probability over the vocabulary. Then we will look at this generated key phrase. We say, okay, if the word coronavirus has been generated, even in this distribution, it is the highest weight, then we still don't want to copy it. So we will kind of block it. And then for another word, maybe the second highest word, it's not part of the present key phrase. Then we will say, okay, we could copy this word. So we will add this distribution to the copy, the probability. You remember the formula we have later here. So it will have two parts. One part is probability of generating the words using copy and not using copy. So this one is basically the probability of using copy. So for if the word coronavirus has appeared, then this one will be set to 0. So we're not going to use it. And for the second word, maybe short, it's not part of the present key phrase, then we will keep it. And then when we add these two probability together for some words, maybe it's a combination of two probability what becomes higher and then becomes a final word that we will pick at this step.
Thank you.
Yeah, so if there's no more question, we'll go over our experiment evaluation. So in our work, we actually consider two tasks. One is for scientific document keyphrase generation, other is for the web pages. For the scientific documents, we are considering mostly these KP20K datasets. It's a collection of scientific articles. And for each article, we'll have its title, abstract, and a list of keywords provided by the authors, and we are using them as a ground truth key phrase. And then as an evaluation, we also evaluate on KP20K, and also there are 4 small data sets that are scientific articles, but they're so tiny that can only be used for test. And then for the web documents, we have 2 data sets. One is a public one called KP Times. It's a collection of news articles, and the keywords for them, they are suggested by professional editors. And then we also have our in-house datasets, which is a random sample of web pages. For each of this web page, we have its title and body. And the keywords for each page would be the key queries that are frequently led to clicks on these web pages from Yahoo search. And the assumption is that if a user issue a query and likely to click on this page, then it means there are some kind of a semantic relationship between this pair. So that's why we consider these kind of queries at the ground truth key phrase to generate. So now we can take a closer look at the data set that we used. So the first 5, they are the scientific documents. We can see that only for KP20K, it's very large with 20K documents, and all the other 4, they are very small. And then in terms of the document length, we see that it's around 100 and 200 tokens. And then the number of key phrase per document is written here. As we said, the present key phrase is only between 40 to 75%. Not all of them are present key phrase. And then if you look at our web data sets for KP Times and our in-house, we both keep them in the order of 20K. But as document length, so both of them are very long. The average is more than 700 tokens. And also they have a large number of sentences. But relatively the number of key phrases is smaller. But again, the number of present key phrase is not very large. Then as a baseline for the evaluation, we use this 1 to 6 schema in our work. So we consider a number of works that are variants of this cat sequence approach. And then we also consider cat sequence variant. Instead of using RNN, we replace it with transformer because our work is a transformer-based model. And the recent work seems to suggest that transformer is a much stronger model than the old RNN models. So we just replace RNN with transformer and try to generate this cat sequence keywords in cat sequence fashion. And then as an evaluation metrics, we also evaluate our sentence selector using precision and recall. And then for the key phrase generation, we use F1 at M and F1 at 5. So here M basically means the actual number of key phrase that's being generated. Because remember that with our approach, we don't predefine the number of K, but just let each document to generate its own number. And in case we're generating F1 at 5, it's just that when not enough key phrases are generated, we consider random keywords, so they will be automatically considered as a bad keywords. Here are some implementation details about our model. We are using a fixed vocabulary of 50K most frequent words. And for each embedding used, we are considering this dimension of file 12. As for transformer, we are following the standard practice using 6 layers for the encoder and 6 layers for decoder. And the multi-head attention has 8 heads with 64 dimensions for key and value. And the fully collected layer is about 2048 dimension. And for training, we are actually, as we have extraction and generation, here we're simply giving them equal weights when doing these 2 tasks. And then for optimizer, we're using Adam. For test, here we are using greedy search without repeated trigrams. That basically means that if when we are generating a word, if that word will result in a trigram that's already been generated, then we will not pick this word at this step. So this seems to be working better than not having this constraint in our experiments. So here's our F1 score evaluation for the scientific data set. Here we are separating the evaluation into present key phrase generation and absent key phrase generation, 2 parts. So here are the 5 different data sets. With the KP20K, where we train the model with the same data set, we can see that our approach results in better results than all these baseline approaches. Same for absent key phrase generation. And then for these other 4 data sets, the result is not very consistent. I think for some of them, our approach are better, but for this, especially for this one, inspect, our model is not as good as old ones. But this is actually because these data sets has relatively shorter documents. It's only about 120 tokens compared to the others. They are longer, they are around 200 words. So our approach seems to work better for these longer documents. And then when we look at the data on the results on the web data set, again, our model is better than these baseline approaches for both present and absent key phrases for KP times and for our in-house data sets. And here we can see that the difference is actually bigger than if we compare with a scientific documents baseline. So one argument is, again, it's because these web documents are very long. So once they are long, it's easier for our model to read and understand the content and make better prediction of the ground truth keywords. Yeah, so that's the F1 score evaluation. But one thing we actually noticed is that when we do the evaluation, we see that for the absent key phrase generation, sometimes the F1 score is extremely low. So that makes us think if this is actually a good evaluation metrics, and if better than the baseline actually means we have a better model or a good model. So to validate this, we conducted a number of editorial evaluation. So we ask our professional editors to judge the relevance between a web page and a generated key phrase. Depending on how relevant they are, they were labeled as excellent, good, fair, or bad. So we ask them to evaluate the quality to among the generated key phrase, how many of them they are actually good or bad. So from this table, we can see that for present key phrase generation, we are achieving around 60% excellent, good. And if we also take into account the keywords that are fairly relevant, we are reaching almost 87%. And then when we look at absent key phrase generation, we see that for even if the F1 score is very low, the precision on the good and excellent is even higher than the present key phrase generation. I think that's kind of gave us also validate our initial thought that a generative approach could be very effective for summarizing the content. It's not necessary to be appearing in the original document. And then when we look at the overall performance for including fair, then it's slightly lower. But overall, I think our model is still achieving a very decent performance for the absent key phrase generation, even if the original F1 score compared to the ground truth key phrase are low. That I think it's also because it's very difficult to generate exactly the same absent key phrase because there are so many different variants to express the same concept. Then we also conducted a number of ablation study. So the key contribution of this work is we actually proposed this Salient sentence selection, and also we decoupled the extraction and the generation and trying to do both with the same network. And also we propose this layer-wise coverage attention to encourage the model to read the entire document and generate the keywords that cover different parts of the documents. So we have our original model performance in the first line, and then without each of these mechanisms in the following lines. So if we look at these results, so it's kind of very interesting because by definition, the decoupling extraction and generation, we wanted to improve the default generative based models. So it would only or mostly affect the present key phrase generation. So we are seeing that here it's getting a much bigger improvement for the present key phrase generation compared to the absent ones. And with Salient sentence selection, as we are just in general picking the most important sentence, it's expected to affect both present and absent key phrase. So as we can see for the web documents, when it's very long, we have good improvement for both. But for KP20K, since the original document is long, but not that long, it's only 200 tokens. So the improvement for absent is not that big. And mostly for present key phrase, it has a good improvement. And then for this layer-wise, the coverage attention, because it's a particular mechanism we introduced for the decoder. So it's as expected, it's producing much better performance for the absent key phrase generation, but doesn't affect the present key phrase generation much. Then we also evaluate the impact of the embedding layer as we have these different character embedding, segment embedding, and so on. So it turns out that each of them contributes a little bit to the final improvement. And then we also evaluate the quality of our sentence selector. So as a baseline to our transformer-based sentence selector, we are just consider this a very naive approach that truncates the documents to keep only the first 200 words. And then for the both domain, we compare the precision and the recall. So for this one, scientific document is a bit difficult to see, but for web domain, it's more clear that with comparable recall, our model is achieve much higher precision for the generated sentence. So using this as input, we have a much better chance to generate better key phrase. I think as our main claim is that to understand long document, we need to do sentence selection. So we also compared our model performance when the documents lengths are different. So we group documents based on number of tokens they have. So for 0 to 100 tokens, we have one set, and then every 100 more words, we have a different set until in the very last, it's more than 700 words, could be up to 7,000 words, which is a very long document. So it's very interesting when the document is small, we see that our approach improves all this baseline, but the difference is kind of very small. And as we go with longer and longer document, the difference is more visible compared to the baseline approaches. And the same happens for absent key phrase generation. Again, for the short documents, there's some improvement, but when we go to the very long documents, it's almost 50% improvement compared to the baseline. Yeah, so finally, a few words about how we actually apply this key phrase generation for contextual advertising. I think we just explained this key phrase generation part that given a web document using its title and body, we are able to generate a number of either present or absent key phrase out of the content. That's to represent the page, the context. And then from the advertiser side, once they have an ad, they usually define a number of keywords that for these keywords, they want their ads to be shown. So they could say that they want to show for coronavirus or general, or they want to show their mask ads for flu. And then in our system, we will have a semantic matching algorithm that can associate or match these generated keywords to the advertiser provided keywords. And then as long as there's a match, this ad will be eligible content for this page, then it will go to the regular auction or so to decide whether these contextual ads can be shown or be placed on this page. So to summarize about this work that we have been doing, we find that for dealing with long document, salient sentence selection actually plays a very important role. With that, we can focus on the most important information, and that will boost the generation performance. And then we also find that since both this extractive approach and the generative approach has their own advantages, so we are having an approach that can deal with these two tasks separately using a shared architecture. It can result of better performance for both kind of keywords. So if you are interested in more details about this work, you can check out our paper. This is published in ACL 2021. So I think that's reached the end of my presentation. Thank you for your attention, and I can answer whatever question that you have.
Okay, thank you, Xiao, for a very interesting talk. Let's thank the speaker. Okay, then let me just stop